Well, down at our command post in our nation's capital is Laura. She is, of course, the editor-in-chief of LifeSet and a Fox News contributor. And Laura Ingraham, it looks as if Kim Jong-un maybe got freaked out by what President Trump said last week.
Well, I look back and read the comments that were made about President Trump's comments about the situation. And it's instructive to do that because he was roundly ridiculed on all the usual shows and all the usual news sources. And it turns out that it looks like they were doing some back-channel communication with China. China publicly didn't look like it was doing much except saying everything needs to calm down. But President Trump, it looks like he handled the situation as it needed to be handled. And there's multi-channel diplomacy always going on behind the scenes. Everybody who has followed these comings and goings with North Korea for years knows that. And what usually happens is North Korea is trying to wring out some type of concession, whether it's supposedly food and medical supplies or other types of money or trade or something. They'll launch these tests of missiles, then they'll threaten, and then they think they'll get what they want. In this case, it didn't look like they got what they wanted. They actually are dealing with a president who sees this as a credible threat and understands that, unfortunately, there is an option that we might have to at some point take, which would be a horrible one. It's not a great option, but it's one we have to recognize. And that hasn't been verbalized before, neither by President Clinton, and remember the champagne glasses clinking with Madeleine Albright over there, or even President Bush. This was much different, and it took a lot of people back when you heard those words, you know, fire and fury from President Trump. But maybe in dealing with this kind of leader in North Korea, that's what you needed.
Yeah, seems like so far it's been handled the right way, but not everyone is saying that, Laura, about the president's response to what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the riots on Saturday. He came out, of course, after it happened, but didn't call out the hate group specifically by name. He did that yesterday. Why do you think he didn't do that immediately? Because when I think of President Trump's brand, people know him as being the guy that out of the gate, he calls things for what it is. A lot of people criticize him for coming out too early, for calling radical Islam, you know, when there's a terrorist attack. People love that about him. People hate that about him. But it seems like that is usually his style. He didn't do that this time.
Yeah, I don't know what the thinking was in the close circles surrounding the president, but I think yesterday was, you know, it was a good reset, and I think he needed to say what he said yesterday, and I think the conversation now should really be focused on how we're going to treat history in the United States. When you see bands of criminals, which is what they were yesterday, ripping down public property and being celebrated in the American media for doing so, we have a real problem on our hands. This is not about racial healing or racial unity when you see property being destroyed. That's not what it's about. It's about the eradication of history and an acknowledgement that we had really difficult, horrible moments in our country's history that we were able to overcome. And at the same time, we do give respect to the dead. I mean, all of our war dead. We respect them. Not respect everything they stood for, but respect the fact that when the time came, they stood up and fought for their views in this country. And I think when you see people who have no idea, it seems, about the history of this country, just roundly denouncing anyone who had any connection to the South, we're in very precarious times. I mean, how long before we see the Workers' Party, as you saw them yesterday, the Communist Party of the United States was represented there in Durham. They had the big banners. They were marching down the streets. How long before they show up at Monticello, where I spent 3 years in law school at Charlottesville in Virginia? How long before they show up at Mount Vernon? What else will be subjected to their eradication and denunciation? This is not about racial healing. This is about the control of the narrative and a destruction of historical recognition. That is terrifying. And what about books? Are they going to start burning books, too? I mean, why not?
So your argument, Laura, is a very sound one. Where does it end? How far does it go at the end of this logic? What does that mean for now, then? What should the stance be for political leaders who are hearing from, you know, one side of the spectrum, if this offends me, it's got to come down, yet someone else is saying when you erase your history, you don't understand it and you forget it? What is the proper stance to be taken
Well,
here?
I think more voices are always better than fewer voices. And so if you have a statue that people suddenly, a lot of them are suddenly offended by it, then put up a monument to peace and understanding or reflection or prayer or nearby. They actually did that in New Orleans, and that wasn't good enough. So we have different ways to recognize history. It's not like you don't have the head of the KKK build a monument to him. I mean, of course, they were Democrats, but you don't see that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people like Robert E. Lee, who, when FDR acknowledged him, I think that was in the early 1930s, said he was one of the finest soldiers America had ever seen. That was FDR who said that about Robert E. Lee.
Sure.
And now they're going after Woodrow Wilson, who's one of the heroes of the Internationalists. This is madness. This is not about what they claim it is. This is not about any type of unity or getting past the racial divide. This is about controlling a historical narrative, which we see happening all over the world. We see it with the Taliban pulling down Christian, historical sites. We've seen this in the old Soviet Union. We see this with the Stalinists. But in America, we have a way of discussing issues and bringing out more viewpoints that I think really does lead to greater understanding and recognition. But you didn't see that in Durham last night. You saw criminality.
Sure. Well, the Confederate-era statues being either vandalized or removed in North Carolina, Kentucky, Gainesville, Atlanta, Baltimore as well. Laura, who should be the decider of whether or not something in your town square is appropriate or should go?
Well, I guess, this is why we have local politics. If local politicians want to, get their list of the offending statues on a particular day, month, week, or year, I guess they can just do this on a regular basis and start erasing moments in their town or localities or city's history. I guess that's what we're just going to keep doing until we remove, every recognition of any point in time in our history where we had difficult challenges and difficult struggles. In my view, it's actually good to teach the young about what our country endured and how, even in very difficult times, individuals are complex figures. Lincoln was complex. P.T. Beauregard in New Orleans actually devoted his post-war life to building schools for all children. Robert E. Lee was a fascinating soldier. His wife's family was actually the slave owners in that family. I mean, if that is what we're going to be as a country, we have a lot of statues to tear down. We have a lot of monuments to raise. And I guess the Communist Party of the United States will be really happy that.
Including to our founders.
I love when you bring up this next generation and how do we teach them? How do we have the right debate? It seems like whenever these incidents happen, we lose sight of the big picture. I mean, you look back at the past 3 days, we have spent more time focused on pointing fingers and blaming and really talking about President Trump than we have about the actual debate and what actually happened there. How do we fix that? Is that the media's fault?
Well, I think it's a national recognition that we ultimately have to come together to understand that all history is complicated. It's difficult at times, but it doesn't mean you eradicate it and make it better. You actually have to continue to improve as a society, and tearing things down, in my view, is not the way to build a new future. And not when it's someone like P.T. Beauregard, who was an amazing figure post-war, Robert E. Lee, who by all Democrat president standards, was one of the finest soldiers in American history. I mean, if you now become a pariah for saying and quoting FDR, then I don't know where we go as a country. That's not learning and that's not education. And what happened last night in Durham, all these media figures writing, well, this is a great moment in the movement. What movement exactly? When you have the Workers' Party, go to workers.org, you'll see what they represent, marching down the streets, and they're holding their banner, and they say, we won. Okay, what exactly are we winning here?
Yeah, exactly.
Great question.
Well, no, you said Judge Napolitano was on the couch earlier, said the answer to hate speech is more speech as opposed to banning it. You're saying the answer to tearing this down is more monuments, more conversation, more discussion to a complex history.
Look, towns and localities, they can do what they want. I mean, I believe in federalism and local rule, but I think we do have to have the conversation. Once you tear it all down, Now what are you going to do for those inner city kids who can't get a decent education? What about the fact that we have rampant crime in places like New Orleans? Is that P.T. Beauregard statue thrown in a heap somewhere going to help that situation?
Does that answer all the questions?
The answer is it doesn't, and they know it doesn't. It's a game they're playing, and it's a cynical, sick, and twisted game. And I don't know where it stops, and it doesn't stop anywhere good. I don't think that.
Speaking of where it stops, Laura, you know, the criticism of it, even the president's triple down. He's condemned it, and then condemned it again. Does the critique from the so-called mainstream media ever stop on this?
They want Donald Trump to bow down to their view of the way the world should be. And he represents everything that most of these people despise. He will never get it right in their eyes.
Did he bow down yesterday, Laura?
I think he did. I think he did a good job yesterday. And again, they were complaining that he read from a teleprompter. On Saturday, they were complaining that he freelanced. So I don't know what will satisfy them, but I think President Trump has to keep his eye focused on the prize, renewing this country, going out to all communities, black, white, Latino, and poor, and spreading the message of economic renewal. That will help more than tearing down statues.
Laura Ingraham joining us from our nation's capital. Laura's going to go do her radio show now and edit Life Set. She's got a busy day. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, guys.